The wind howled like a wounded beast across the frozen plain. Snow whipped through the air, making it hard to see even a few steps ahead. The ice storm had started hours ago, and now it was getting worse. Inside a small metal shelter buried in the snow, Callan, a human engineer, tightened his coat around him. His heater hummed softly, fighting the cold that still crept in through the walls. He looked out the tiny window, but all he saw was white. He picked up his cup of warm broth and sighed. Just one more night, he whispered to himself. One more night and the rescue ship comes. Suddenly a sound broke the silence. A sound that didn't belong. A cry. Faint. High-pitched. It was not the wind. Callan stood up slowly, setting the cup aside. He walked to the door and opened it just a little. The cold hit him like a punch, but the cry came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a child. His heart jumped. No way, there's no one out here. But the sound came again. Weak. Desperate. Without thinking, Callan grabbed his thermal cloak, gloves, and boots. He pulled on his helmet and stepped out into the storm. The wind cut across his faceplate. Snow stuck to his clothes as he trudged forward, following the sound. It was hard to hear, but the cry came every few seconds. Then, he saw something, a small shape in the snow, barely moving. He rushed forward and dropped to his knees. It was a child, an alien child. Her skin was a soft bluish gray with thin arms and legs wrapped in torn cloth. Her eyes were shut, and her lips had started to turn purple. Frost clung to her hair. Callan didn't think twice. He scooped her up into his arms. She was light. Too light. "Hey," he said through his helmet mic. "Stay with me." Her head rested on his shoulder. She made a tiny sound, like a whimper. She was still alive. Callan turned back toward his shelter, running as fast as he could in the deep snow. But before he reached the door, a deep growl rolled through the storm behind him. He turned and saw nothing, but he felt it. Something was following them. Something big. Callan slammed the shelter door shut and locked it behind him. He pulled off his helmet and set the alien girl gently on the heated floor. Her small chest rose and fell quickly. Her body trembled, teeth chattering. He wrapped her in thermal blankets and pulled a heat pack from the supply box, sliding it near. Her ribs. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." She didn't respond, but her shivering started to slow. Callan checked for wounds. Her feet were raw, almost frozen. She had no shoes. Her clothes were wet and thin. She wouldn't have lasted another hour out there. What were you doing alone, in a storm like this? She was too young to answer. Maybe 4 or 5 years old if her species aged like humans. Callan turned to his communication panel. Still dead. The storm was blocking all signals. He looked down at her again. That's when he noticed something, a second trail in the snow. Not as small. A bigger set of footprints had been with hers, but they ended too soon. His heart sank. Someone had been with her. Maybe a parent. But where were they now? That night, Callan couldn't sleep. The girl lay beside the heater, wrapped tight, breathing better now. He sat in a chair nearby, watching the door, pulse rifle across his lap. He couldn't stop thinking. Why was she out there? Who was she? And most of all, what made that growl? He checked the lock again and lowered the lights. Snow slammed against the shelter like fists. But inside, it was warm. The girl made a small sound in her sleep. Callan looked over. Her tiny hand had reached out and grabbed the edge of his coat. She was scared. And somehow, even in her sleep, she knew he had helped her. A tear rolled down her cheek. Callan's jaw tightened. Whatever this child had gone through, it wasn't over. And whatever was out there would be coming soon. The little girl slept through the storm, but Callan didn't. He kept hearing things, creaks, thumps, a growl that echoed once, then stopped. He sat by the heater, his pulse rifle ready, eyes on the door. Every few minutes, he looked at the child. Her breathing had become slower, steady. She had survived the night, but something felt unfinished. He remembered the second trail, the larger one in the snow. It had stopped too suddenly. Someone had been with her, someone who didn't make it to shelter. Callan stood, grabbed a second cloak, and powered up his wrist scanner. The storm was weaker now, cold and deadly. Yes, but no longer blinding. He looked down at the sleeping girl. "I'll be back," he whispered. He opened the door slowly, rifle slung over one shoulder, and stepped into the white world again. The wind no longer screamed, but it whispered, soft and eerie. Callan followed the memory of those larger tracks. His boots crunched deep into the snow. He moved quickly but carefully, scanning every drift. Then he saw it. A dark shape, half buried in snow, slumped against a rock. He rushed forward. It was an alien woman, tall, thin, her skin the same pale gray-blue as the child's, but now tinged with ice. She had long braids frozen stiff and was wrapped in what looked like pieces of ship fabric. Her arms were still curled protectively around a bundle. A second child. Callan dropped to his knees. The second child didn't move. Frozen. Lifeless. But the mother, she was breathing. Barely. "Hey, you're alive," Callan said, pulling off a glove and touching her cheek. It was cold as stone. He lifted her face. She moaned softly. Her eyes fluttered open. Just for a moment. Then closed. "She's in shock," Callan muttered. Damn it, he looked around. No beasts, no tracks. But he knew time was short. He wrapped her in the extra cloak, secured the dead child's body gently in a fabric wrap, and lifted the mother onto his back. She was heavier than expected, but he walked, step by painful step, back through the snow. By key. The time Callan returned to the shelter, his body felt frozen, his legs numb. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, placing her beside her daughter. Her skin was still icy. He rubbed her arms and placed heat packs along her back. He whispered, "Come on. Don't die. Your kid needs you." The alien child woke and sat up with wide, shocked eyes. Her gaze fell on the woman. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Then, she reached out and touched her mother's face. She whimpered, "Ma!" The mother stirred. Her eyes opened again. She saw her daughter, and for a second, her face lit up. Then she saw Callan, and she screamed. It was a weak scream, full of fear and pain. But it made the little girl cry out in terror too. The alien woman tried to rise, tried to grab her daughter and pull her away from Callan. "Whoa, stop. I'm not going to hurt you," Callan said, backing away with his hands raised. But she didn't listen. Her kind, he realized, had learned to fear humans. She collapsed, coughing hard. Her body was still too weak to move much, but her eyes, those glowing violet eyes, were locked on him with pure mistrust. He had seen that look before. In war zones. In refugee camps. In people who had been hunted. Callan knelt slowly. He didn't speak. He just moved the second child's wrapped body near her. She noticed it at once. She let out a sound, a mix of cry and breath. Then her hand trembled as she reached out and placed it gently on the wrap. She pulled it to her chest and held it close. She didn't cry. She didn't scream again. She just closed her eyes and let out a whisper in her own language. A prayer. Callan stepped back. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. She had lost one child, but still had one left, and for now, the enemy she feared was the only one keeping her alive. The silence hung heavy in the shelter. The alien girl looked between her mother and Callan, unsure what to do. Finally, she crawled slowly into Callan's lap and hugged his arm. Her mother watched in silence, no scream, no anger, just surprise, and maybe, for a moment, a tiny flicker of doubt in her fear. The air inside the shelter was warm. but the silence was frozen. Visari, the alien mother, had not spoken a word since she woke. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on Callan, the human who had brought her and her child in from the snow. Her other child, the one wrapped in cloth, lay still beside her. She hadn't wept. She hadn't thanked him. She only watched, like a cornered animal. Callan stayed near the heating unit, keeping his distance. The small alien girl, he had started, calling her Luma, sat close to him, eating warm broth. She had stopped shivering, but Visari refused food, refused help. She didn't even speak to Luma. Callan didn't press her. He had seen that look before long ago. It was the look of someone who had been betrayed too many times, but he had also seen people come back from it, if they were given a reason. Later that evening, Callan worked quietly at the repair bench. He needed to fix the signal beacon before the next storm hit. Luma played on the floor beside him, drawing little circles in the dust. That's when he noticed something strange. Visari had finally moved. She was beside the tiny wrapped body of her other child, her son. She had opened the wrap halfway and was combing his hair with her fingers. Her shoulders trembled slightly. But still, no tears, just silence. Then she spoke, but not to Callan. She spoke in her own tongue, soft words, whispered to her son's still body. The language was unlike anything Callan had heard. Smooth, sad, melodic. Then her tone changed, sharper, angry. She looked straight at Callan, and in broken English, she asked coldly, "Why did you save us?" Callan turned, surprised. It was the first time she had addressed him. He spoke gently. Because no one else was going to, she narrowed her eyes. Humans do not help, they take. Callan didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Maybe, but not all of us." Visari stood slowly, weak but proud. She pointed at the scar across her neck. "Humans gave this to me, took my sister, took my brother, burned our village." Callan didn't look away. "I believe you." She wasn't expecting that. Her hand dropped. Her voice softened just a little. "So, why help me?" Callan looked at Luma, who now held his hand, then back at Visari. Because she didn't choose that past. She deserves a future. Visari's breath caught. She looked at her daughter, really looked, and for the first time since waking, her eyes softened. That night, Callan gave them privacy. He stepped outside, despite the cold, to check the antenna again. The wind bit at his face, but he needed space. The moment between mother and child inside felt sacred. When he returned, he found something waiting on the floor by his tools, a small silver token. It was shaped like a leaf, with strange alien symbols etched on it. Visari sat nearby, silent again. "What is this?" he asked. "A sign," she said quietly, "from my people. A life debt token." Callan blinked. "You're giving me a life debt?" She looked at him, emotion in her voice for the first time. "Not yours, hers. My child lives because of you." He didn't know what to say. So he said, "Nothing." He just picked up the token and handed it back. Visari looked confused. Callan smiled. "You don't owe me anything, just take care of her." Her fingers curled around the token again. She nodded once. Later that night, as Luma slept beside her mother, Visari quietly asked, "What is your name, human?" Callan looked up from his seat by the heater. "Callan." She repeated it softly. "Callan." There was a long pause, then Visari whispered, "I thank you." Not loud, not certain, but real. It was the first time she had ever said thank you to a human. Snow fell quietly now, like ash after a fire. Inside the small shelter, Callan finally felt a moment of peace. Visari no longer stared at him with hate. She held her daughter Luma close. and for the first time, warmth passed between them. Not just from the heater, but from something deeper. But peace never lasted long in the wilds of Velkar 9. Not when something was still watching from the dark. That night, while Luma slept curled between the heater and her mother, Callan sat fixing the broken antenna parts again. Outside, the storm had faded and the ice field was calm, but a sound made him stop. A low, heavy sniffing. At first, he thought it was the wind. Then, a second sound. Scratch, scratch, thump. It came from the back wall. Callan stood slowly. He grabbed his pulse rifle and quietly turned off the inside lights. Darkness fell. But outside, something moved. He crept to the side window and wiped the frost. That's when he saw it. A tall shape, nearly blending with the snow. White fur. Glowing. Yellow eyes. An ice hunter. A predator native to this planet. Callan had read about them but never seen one up close. It was massive, with long limbs, sharp claws, and bone plates along its back. It wasn't here by accident. It had followed the scent of blood. Inside, Vasari's eyes snapped open. She sat up fast, clutching her daughter. She saw Callan's face and knew. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't look at her. "Trouble." He moved to the door and locked the second layer of metal. He whispered back, "Stay behind me, don't make noise." But the creature was already circling the shelter. They heard another thud, this time against the front. The shelter shook. Luma began to cry. Vasari held her tighter. Callan whispered, "It's testing the walls, looking for a weak spot." Then, a loud crack. A chunk of the outer wall near the vent bent inward. Callan raised his rifle. "I'm going outside." Vasari grabbed his arm. "You'll die." He looked at her and forced a smile. "Not if I'm lucky." Before she could stop him, he slid on his helmet, unlocked the top hatch, and climbed out into the cold night. Snow crunched softly beneath his boots. And then, silence. He turned and saw it. The ice hunter stood just 10 feet away, growling. Low steam blew from its nose. Its claws glinted under the moonlight. It was bigger than he'd imagined, and it was hungry. Callan aimed and fired. Blue light burst from his rifle, striking the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain but didn't fall. Instead, it charged. Callan dove behind a snowdrift as claws tore through the place where he had stood. The beast spun around, snarling. Another shot. This time to its leg. It limped. Howled again. But it was still coming. Inside, Vasari heard it all. She looked at her daughter, then at the fallen body of her son. Her jaw tightened. She stood. A minute later, Callan stumbled backward, blood running down his arm. His rifle battery was low. The beast lunged at him again. Flash! A spear flew through the air and struck the creature in the side. It screamed. Callan turned. Vasari stood behind him holding a second spear, her people's weapon, made from ship scrap and bone. The beast looked at her, then at Callan, and began to back away. A third shot from Callan's rifle sent it limping into the snow and disappearing into the dark. Silence returned. Vasari dropped the spear. Callan fell to his knees, breathing hard. "Thanks. I thought I told you to stay." Inside, she raised an eyebrow. "You also said, not all humans are cruel." He laughed weakly. "Fair." Back inside the shelter, Vasari helped clean the blood from his wound. Her hands were gentle now. "Careful." "You are injured because of us," she said. "No," Callan replied. "I'm injured because I chose to protect you." Vasari looked at him, searching his face. "You fight for those you don't know," he shrugged. "That's what humans do sometimes." She didn't answer, but her hand rested gently on his for a moment. That night, as they sat quietly in the dim light, Luma crawled into both their laps, not choosing one, choosing both. Vasari didn't push her away and Callan didn't move. They just sat there, 3 survivors, and maybe something more. Dawn broke slow and silver across the frozen land. Inside the shelter, the heater hummed softly. Steam rose from a small metal bowl of boiled roots and protein broth. The storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy, like the silence after a battle. Callan sat shirtless, his shoulder wrapped in bandages soaked with burn gel. His arm throbbed from the ice hunter's claw. Across from him, Vasari moved quietly, crushing herbs between two metal plates. He watched her. She didn't look at him, but every now and then, her eyes would flick toward his wound. "Those herbs," Callan said, voice low, "they're from your planet?" Vasari gave a short nod. "Grows beneath the black ice, only in the east valleys." She walked over, knelt beside him, and began pressing the warm paste over his wound. Callan winced. She didn't apologize, but her hands were careful. Luma peeked from behind a blanket, watching them both. Her mother's touch was different now. Not afraid, not cold. Vasari spoke softly. "Your wound will heal faster this way, if infection does not begin." Callan smiled. "So, you do want me to live after all?" Vasari looked at him, and for the first time, her lips almost curled upward. Almost. "I don't want my daughter to lose two protectors," she said. Then she turned her face away, but Callan saw the truth in her words. After she finished wrapping the herbs in cloth, she sat beside him. Not across the room, not guarding the door, just beside him. The shelter felt smaller now, not in a bad way, more like it was full of something invisible. Trust, maybe, or something near it. Callan leaned his head back and exhaled. "I didn't think I'd end up here, on a dead moon in a storm, babysitting aliens." Vasari tilted her head. "And yet, here you are." "Yeah." He chuckled. "Not the retirement I imagined." Luma crawled into Vasari's lap and handed her a small drawing, scribbled with circles and shapes using the end of a broken stylus. "Family?" Vasari asked, pointing to the shapes. Luma nodded. She pointed to the smallest shape. "Me." Then the bigger one. "Mama." Then the tall one with long arms and spiky hair. "Callan?" She giggled. Callan laughed. "That's a good likeness." Vasari held the drawing in her hands like it was a rare treasure. Maybe it was. That night, as the temperature dropped again, Vasari laid Luma to sleep and sat beside Callan, pulling her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. Callan noticed. Without a word, he took his thick emergency blanket and draped it over them both. Vasari tensed, just for a second, then relaxed. "You humans give warmth freely," she murmured. "Yeah," Callan said. "But it's not just the blanket." He looked at her, and, for once, she looked back. There was a moment between them. No words, just the heat between two bodies after surviving cold death together. Vasari finally asked, "Do you miss your people?" Callan nodded. "Every day." She looked at the fire. "I lost half my family to war, and the rest to snow." He said nothing, but his hand, slowly, gently, reached over and touched hers. And this time, she didn't pull away. The night passed, without beasts, without screams, without fear. Just two survivors, wrapped in the same blanket, holding a child's hope between them. And for the first time since she lost everything, Vasari slept peacefully. The next morning brought something Callan hadn't felt in days: sunlight. The pale star above Velkar 9 broke through the clouds. The snow around the shelter sparkled like crushed glass. It should have felt peaceful, but Vasari didn't look calm. She stood outside the shelter, her face turned to the sky. Her ears twitched slightly, her breath fogged in the cold. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Callan stepped beside her, scanning the horizon. "What do you hear?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Moments later, a distant hum grew in the air, mechanical, rhythmic, familiar. A ship. Callan's heart jumped. "Rescue team?" Vasari's eyes narrowed. "No, that sound. It's ours." Alien engines. She turned and ran back inside. Luma was still playing on the floor. Vasari knelt and picked her up, holding her tight. Callan followed, confused. Wait, your people? That's good, right? Vasari's voice dropped low. Not if they think you took us, Callan blinked. What? She looked him straight in the eye. We have been hunted. Our kind lives in fear. If they see a human in a hidden shelter, with a wounded mother and a child, they will assume the worst. Callan's chest tightened. They'll think I hurt you, Vasari nodded, and they will kill you before asking. Outside, the sound grew louder. Snow shook loose from the roof. Luma grabbed her mother's neck tighter. A shadow passed overhead. The ship had arrived. A large black craft landed near the rocks, steam hissing from its sides. The insignia of Vasari's people, curved wings around a silver flame, was painted. On its hull, soldiers stepped out. They wore bone-colored armor, spears and rifles both. Their faces were covered. They moved fast. Stay inside, Callan said, grabbing his rifle. But Vasari blocked the door. No. If they see you armed, they will attack, he frowned. I can't just hide. She paused, then reached into her pack and pulled out the life debt token he had returned. She pressed it into his palm. If you trust me, she said, let me speak for you. Callan looked at her for a long moment. Then, he nodded. Vasari stepped outside, alone, holding Luma in one arm. Callan stood behind the door, peeking through a crack, heart pounding. The soldiers aimed at her, but one, clearly a commander, stepped forward. They spoke quickly in their language. Vasari kept her voice strong. She lowered Luma to the ground, stepped forward and showed her wounds, the frostburn, the scars, the body of her dead son still wrapped behind her. The soldier's expression softened until the commander looked at the shelter. His eyes narrowed. He asked something sharply. Vasari hesitated, and then she stepped aside and called Callan's name. Callan stepped out slowly, hands raised, no weapons. Just the token in his palm. The soldiers moved fast. 3 of them raised rifles instantly. Wait, Vasari shouted in their language. The commander barked a command. They froze. Vasari reached out and held Callan's arm. Then she spoke clearly and firmly, her voice louder than before. This human saved my life. He saved my child. He fought off the beast alone. He did not hurt us. He healed us. There was a long silence. Then Vasari held up the token. By our law, she said, his life is tied to mine, and my child's. The soldiers looked at one another. The commander stepped forward and stared into Callan's eyes. Finally, he lowered his weapon. No more words were spoken. The soldiers helped lift the body of Vasari's son with care. They offered blankets, medical kits, and water. Vasari looked at Callan. I told them everything. And they believed you? She nodded. They had to. The token, and my truth. They saw my fear was gone. Callan smiled faintly. And now what? She looked at the ship, then at him. You can come, if you wish. Callan looked up at the sky. He thought about the cold nights, the near-death moments, the bond that had formed in the darkest hour. He looked at Luma, who was reaching out for his hand, and he knew. I'm not leaving her, he said. Vasari tilted her head. Her? He smiled. And her mother. The alien ship lifted off with a soft hum, leaving behind only footprints in the snow and a story that would never be forgotten. Inside, the cabin was quiet. Callan sat beside Luma, who leaned sleepily. Against his arm, a soft blanket around her. Across from them sat Vasari, watching silently. Her hands were wrapped around a hot drink, steam rising into the cool air. But the warmth in the room came from something deeper than heat. It came from trust. It came from survival. It came from them. Vasari finally spoke. My people. They were unsure about you. Callan nodded. Yeah. I noticed the rifles. She gave a small smile. A real one this time. But I told them the truth. About the ice beast. About the blanket. About how you stayed. Even when you could have left. Callan looked down at Luma. She gave me a reason. Vasari nodded. She gave me one too. As the ship soared above the clouds, Luma stirred. Her tiny hand reached up, gripping Callan's jacket. He covered her hand with his own. Gently. She feels safe, Vasari whispered. Callan looked at her. So do I. Hours later, the ship landed, at a hidden sanctuary carved into the mountain cliffs. Alien domes shone softly under the sun. Vasari's people waited at the entrance, tall figures with silver cloaks and sharp eyes. Some glared at Callan, others simply looked curious. But no one stopped him, because Vasari walked beside him, not behind, not ahead, and Luma held both their hands as a family. The sanctuary was different from anything Callan had seen. Trees that glowed at night, waterfalls that steamed with heat, shelters grown from living stone. It was beautiful. But more than that, it was healing. For Vasari, for Luma, and even for him. One evening, Vasari found Callan alone near the glowing stream. He sat on a smooth rock, eyes on the stars above. She sat beside him in silence. Will you stay? She asked after a while. Callan was quiet. Then he nodded. There's nothing for me back home, he said, but here. I feel like I belong. Vasari reached into her cloak and pulled something out. It was the drawing Luma had made in the shelter. 3 figures, Mama, Luma, and Callan. She handed it to him. I kept this, she said, because, I think, she saw the truth before we did. Callan smiled, eyes stinging. He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his chest pocket. Then I'll carry it with me. Always. That night, they sat by a fire, the 3 of them. Luma curled in Vasari's lap, blinking sleepily. Callan threw another log into the flames and leaned back. You know, he said, when I first heard her cry in the snow, I thought it was the wind. Vasari looked down at her daughter. It was more than a cry, Callan nodded. It was a call that brought all of us together. The fire crackled. The stars blinked above. In the heart of a frozen world once ruled by fear, a new story began. One built on courage, kindness, and the warmth that saved them all, not just from the cold, but from being alone.